Ruthless billionaire forced marriage story. She changed his heart with her blood. Welcome, dear viewer. Today, you're about to witness a story that will touch your soul. A tale of pain, love, betrayal, and a second chance that will leave you speechless. I gently ask you, please, watch this video till the very end. I promise you, you will not regret it. It's not just a story. It's a mirror to the heart. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story that speaks to your soul. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Drop your country or city in the comments. I'm reading each one with love. Now, take a deep breath. Hold your heart and let the story begin. The grand marble hall of the Knight estate was decorated with such opulence it could put royal palaces to shame. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in soft golden light. Classical music played from a live orchestra, and the scent of white roses filled the air, carefully chosen to match the bride's lehenga, though no one had asked her opinion. It was a wedding that looked like a fairy tale from the outside, but beneath the luxury, two worlds were colliding, violently, and without consent. Alexander Knight stood at the altar like a man awaiting trial, his jaw clenched, eyes distant, tailored in a sleek black tuxedo that screamed power. The coldness in his stare could freeze fire. Cameras flashed all around him, capturing his sculpted features, his tall frame, and the rumors swelling in high society. The Ice King is getting married, but no one saw the storm raging inside him. He wasn't just angry. He was livid, trapped, betrayed by his own blood. His father, Gregory Knight, a dying mogul with failing organs but a sharp mind, had made it clear. Marry Alina, or risk being cut off from the empire entirely. The company shares, the assets, the throne, all of it would go to his cousin unless he fulfilled the old man's final command. And so Alexander stood there, seething. On the other end of the aisle, Alina stepped forward. She was grace wrapped in uncertainty. Her deep brown skin glowed under the warm lights, contrasting beautifully with the pale ivory of her dress. Her long dark hair was braided elegantly, adorned with pearls and jasmine. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with fragile hope. She looked at Alexander not as a billionaire or a brute, but as a future husband, a man she longed to understand, a man she secretly prayed to love. The guests whispered about her beauty. Exotic, someone said under their breath. Unusual choice, another murmured, loud enough to sting. But Alina kept walking, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. She knew this was an arranged marriage. She knew Alexander hadn't chosen her. But she believed, maybe foolishly, that love could bloom even in the coldest of hearts. When she reached the altar, she looked up at him. He did not look back. Alexander's eyes were fixed on the minister, his expression like stone. He didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't glance at her face, didn't so much as breathe in her direction. The photographer, confused, whispered to him, "Sir, just one shot for the press. Can you turn to her?" Alexander slowly turned, just enough to meet her eyes, but there was nothing in them. No warmth, no curiosity, no attraction, just ice. Alina's smile wavered. They exchanged vows like they were signing a contract. The words, "to love and to cherish," rolled off his tongue with such mechanical disinterest it made Alina's hands tremble. She managed to get through hers with a trembling voice and a heart already cracking. When it was time to kiss the bride, Alexander barely grazed her forehead with his lips, then stepped away, turning his back before the applause could even begin. The drive back to the night mansion was silent. Alina sat in the back seat of the limousine, her hands folded tightly in her lap, stealing glances at the man who now legally owned her fate. He scrolled through his phone as if she wasn't even there. No congratulations, no warmth, no attempt to speak. "I know you didn't want this," she said softly. "But maybe we can try to understand each other." Alexander didn't respond. After several seconds, he spoke. "This is temporary. Do your part, keep the media off my back, and stay out of my life. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of, like a pet." Alina felt her throat tighten, but she didn't cry. Not yet. When they arrived at the mansion, the staff welcomed them with forced cheer. There was champagne, a slow piano melody, even a tiered cake. But Alexander went straight upstairs without a word, leaving Alina to smile and thank everyone alone. Later that night, she stood in their enormous bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She removed her jewelry one piece at a time, her heart growing heavier with each click. She had dreamt of this night for years, marrying a man who would look at her like she was his world. Instead, she had married a man who wouldn't even look at her face. The door opened. Her heart skipped. Alexander walked in, unbuttoning his shirt, not sparing her a glance. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room." Her lips parted. "But it's our wedding night." "Exactly," he said, his tone sharp, which makes it the perfect night to start setting expectations. He walked out before she could reply, leaving the door open behind him, as if even closing it for her would be a favor. Alina sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where he stood. The satin sheets, the diamonds on her neck, the mansion. It all felt like a cage. Her eyes finally welled up, but she wiped the tears quickly. She refused to let them fall. Not yet. She lay down in silence, curling herself into the center of the bed like a child lost in a palace. Meanwhile, Alexander poured himself a drink in the guest suite, standing by the window, glaring at the stars. In his mind, this was just a bump in his perfect life, a temporary compromise. He couldn't care less about her skin, her body, or her gentle eyes. She was just a pawn in his father's game. But something about the way she looked at him at the altar lingered. It wasn't love. It was purity. A kind of softness that irritated him because it didn't belong in his world. He took another sip of whiskey and forced the thought away. "I don't care," he muttered aloud, but deep down, the first crack in his armor had already formed. And Alina, in the quiet of the bridal suite, whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow will be better. 6 months." That's how long it had been since Alina had become Mrs. Alexander Knight. Not that anyone ever called her that. Not in society, not in the mansion, not even Alexander himself. The Knight mansion, with its endless marble corridors, high-arched ceilings, and walls lined with priceless art, had turned into an echoing void. It was a palace of wealth, yes, but one stripped of warmth, laughter, or the simple intimacy of a shared life. She walked its halls like a shadow, present but unseen, breathing but unnoticed. Each morning she woke up in their shared bedroom alone, her hands reaching out instinctively toward the cold, untouched side of the bed. The pillows remained uncreased, the sheets immaculate. He never slept there. Still, Alina tried. She cooked breakfast, remembering from his interviews that he liked his eggs soft and his toast burnt on the edges. She placed them carefully on the dining table, along with fresh juice and fruit he never touched. He would walk past her in silence, phone in hand, his eyes fixed on the markets or messages from faceless people who mattered more than the woman in front of him. At first, she dressed up. Every evening, she changed into delicate silk gowns, combed her hair into soft waves, applied lipstick, just in case he noticed. She lit scented candles in their bedroom, filled the air with jasmine and sandalwood. She decorated their room with the fairy lights and placed a book he once mentioned liking on the nightstand, hoping he'd read it again. He never even crossed the threshold. Alina began to memorize the sound of the front gates opening and closing. At 7 p.m., they opened to let his sleek black car roll out. At 3 a.m., they opened again to let him return. Drunk, laughing, and sometimes humming a song he'd danced to with someone else. She stopped asking where he'd been. The answer was always in the lipstick stains on his shirt collar or the faint trail of perfume that wasn't hers. Once, she stood at the top of the stairs as he stumbled in, and he didn't see her. "Good night, Mr. Knight," the driver whispered, holding him steady. Alexander laughed. "Night? It's already morning somewhere." Alina clutched the banister tightly, her knuckles white, and turned away before he looked up. The mansion staff avoided her gaze. They had grown used to the silence. No one asked why their employer's wife sat alone on the terrace for hours, staring at the moon. No one commented on the fading flowers she replaced daily in the vase beside his study. No one dared pity her. She didn't want pity, just acknowledgement, affection, a hand to hold. She still wore her bridal bangles. The red glass clinked softly as she moved through the house, a haunting reminder of the promises made under the wedding canopy. Promises she had taken seriously, even if he hadn't. At night, when loneliness became too loud to ignore, she would pull out her diary and write letters she never sent. "Dear Alexander, today I heard you laugh. I think I smiled at the sound before I realized it wasn't for me. I still hope you'll come home early tomorrow. I made your favorite pasta. I don't know if you even remember liking it anymore." The ink would smudge with tears, but she never stopped writing. It was the only place she could still speak freely. Her mother called once every week. "Beta, how's married life?" Alina would pause, then lie. "It's fine, Mama. Just busy." But her voice betrayed her. One night, she mustered the courage to speak. She stood by the door as Alexander tied his tie in the hallway mirror. He looked flawless, as always, sharp, expensive, untouchable. "Alex," she said softly. He paused, not turning. "I made dinner. Maybe, just tonight, you could stay. We could eat together. Talk. I miss you." He glanced at his reflection, then at her through the mirror. "Don't start this now." "I'm not asking for much," she whispered. "Just time. A conversation." He turned, his expression already sharp with irritation. "You think this is some fairy tale? That I'll suddenly fall for the brown-skinned bride I never asked for?" The slap of his words echoed louder than any hand could have. Alina stepped back. "I didn't say that. I'm late for a party. Don't wait up." And he was gone. She didn't cry that night. She sat by the fireplace, the food untouched on the table, and stared into the flickering flames until dawn kissed the horizon. She had married a man whose heart was colder than winter marble, and yet she still found it within her to care. Still dreamed that maybe one day he would see her not as an inconvenience, but as someone worth loving. But hope is a cruel companion. It stays just long enough to break you a little more. The rain tapped softly on the arched windows of the night mansion, a quiet lullaby for a house where nothing else ever whispered of peace. It was almost midnight, another evening fading into early hours, and once again, Alexander Knight had not come home. Alina sat curled up on the love seat by the window in her nightgown, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, as though it could shield her from the chill of loneliness. A candle flickered beside her, casting shadows across the wall. Dinner lay cold on the table for the third night in a row. The smell of the butter chicken she had spent hours cooking still hung faintly in the air, now mixed with the sting of neglect. She had rehearsed the words in her head 100 times, different versions, different tones, sometimes soft and understanding, sometimes firm, sometimes tearful. But they all began with the same plea. Please, just see me. When she heard the iron gates groan open and the car roll in over the gravel driveway, her heart pounded. This was it. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She couldn't keep pretending she was okay. Tonight, she needed to speak. The front door slammed open. Alexander entered, his blazer tossed over his shoulder, his tie half undone, his breath heavy with the scent of scotch and smoke. Lipstick again, smudged faintly along the curve of his neck. Alina stepped forward, her bare feet cold against the marble floor. He looked up at her, startled to see her awake. "Why are you standing there like a ghost?" he muttered. "I was waiting for you," she said, voice tight but steady. He rolled his eyes. "Don't start." She took a step closer. "Alex, please. I don't want your money. I never did." He froze, his jaw tightened, but she kept going. "I want your time, your attention, your respect. Just something to remind me that I matter." He scoffed. "You don't get to pull this poor wife act, Alina." "I'm not acting." Her voice cracked as tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm your wife, not a tenant in your house." Silence. For a second, just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Surprise? But it vanished as quickly as it came. He walked past her, tossing his keys onto the table. "You were forced on me." The words hit her like a slap. "I didn't choose this marriage," he continued, venom curling in his voice. "You were a clause in a contract, a chess piece in my father's manipulative game. Don't confuse this arrangement for love." Alina stared at him, breath catching. "You don't belong in my world," he said, turning to face her fully now, eyes cold. "You never did." Her legs almost gave way. Alexander stormed upstairs, leaving a trail of silence and shattered hope behind him. The door slammed, and it felt like the sound echoed through every bone in her body. Alina stood still for a long time. Her tears were soundless. Her hands trembled. The words kept playing in her mind on a cruel, endless loop. "You were forced on me. You don't belong in my world." She walked slowly back to the bedroom, the room he had never shared with her, and sat at the edge of the bed. Her reflection stared back at her from the vanity. Mascara smudged, lips trembling. A woman still wearing hope like a curse. She opened the drawer beside the bed and took out the small wooden box she had hidden there. Inside were her wedding bangles, the letters she had written to him but never given, and a small, delicate dream that love could grow even where it wasn't planted. She picked up the bangles and held them to her chest. That night, Alina didn't cry loudly. No sobs echoed in the halls. Only silence, heavy, dignified, painful. She silently packed her dreams into a corner of her heart and folded away the last shred of fantasy she'd held on to. Not because she had stopped loving him, but because she had finally accepted the truth. Alexander Knight didn't see her. And maybe he never would. Weeks passed like slow-moving clouds across a sky thick with disappointment. The mansion remained a hollow shell of luxury, and Alina moved through it like a ghost who had already mourned her own death. She no longer waited up for Alexander. She no longer sets the table for two. She no longer asked him where he went, or why he came back smelling like expensive perfume and empty sin. Something inside her had shifted the night he threw those words at her like knives. "You don't belong in my world." It had carved itself into her chest, deep and permanent. A wound that didn't bleed, but pulsed with quiet pain. She stopped writing in her diary. The pages felt too tender for truths so heavy. Then one morning, as sunlight filtered gently through the sheer curtains of the dining room, Alina walked in to find something unexpected. An envelope on the table. No name, no note. Just the cold, impersonal presence of legal paperwork. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. She already knew what it was before she opened it. The weight of it said everything. Divorce papers. There it was, in black and white, her name and his, separated by a crisp line of ink and a clause that screamed finality. Her chest tightened, but she didn't cry. Not this time. There were no tears left to give a man who had never deserved them. Alina stood still for several minutes, not moving, not breathing, only reading the words over and over, as if they might eventually become something else. Then, calmly, almost gracefully, she walked to the kitchen, pulled out a pen from the drawer, and signed. It was the most painful and the most empowering thing she had ever done. Even the staff noticed her silence, deeper than usual, heavier. The maids avoided eye contact. The butler's usual stiffness softened for a moment as he passed her in the hallway. But no one said anything. They knew. Somehow they all knew this was the end of her story in this house. Alina returned to her bedroom and took out 2 suitcases, not the designer ones he had bought for her, but the old ones she brought with her from her mother's house. She didn't pack much. Not the diamonds he never complimented, not the gowns he never noticed, not the shoes she bought in hopes of catching his eye. She packed her books, dog-eared, worn, full of words that had once comforted her in silent nights. She packed her diary, though many pages had been torn out in frustration and grief. And she packed one photograph, their wedding photo. The only one where she was smiling genuinely, where she still had hope in her eyes. She folded it carefully, tucking it between her books, not because she still longed for him, but because it was a reminder of the woman she used to be. One last look around the mansion. She walked through each room, not to mourn, but to say goodbye to a version of herself that had bent and broken for someone who never looked her way. She stepped outside, alone. No one stopped her. No one called her name. The gates closed behind her, and it felt like a chapter of a story was not just ending. It was being sealed shut with finality. When she arrived back in her old neighborhood, the contrast hit her like a wave. The streets were narrower, the paint peeled on fences, the air was thick with the smell of home-cooked food and stories that lived in every crack of the walls. The city noise here wasn't filtered by tall gates and tinted windows. It was real, raw, and honest. Her mother opened the door, still in her apron, flour dusted on her hands. The moment she saw Alina standing there, with those old suitcases and hollow eyes, she didn't ask anything. She just pulled her daughter into her arms, and for the first time in weeks, Alina let herself breathe. She cried. Not because of the divorce, not because of the mansion, not even because of Alexander. She cried for the love she gave that was never received, for the warmth she offered that was left untouched, for the woman she had to kill inside herself to survive that marriage. And her mother, without asking a single question, just held her, rocked her like she was 5 again, whispered prayers into her hair, and kissed her forehead. That night, Alina slept in her childhood room. The posters on the wall were faded. The fan made a ticking sound. But for the first time, in a long, long time, she didn't feel alone. She had been signed away like a forgotten contract, but she was still alive. And now, she was free. The mornings in her mother's home were nothing like the hollow elegance of the night mansion. They began with the clatter of pans, the smell of cardamom tea, and the hum of neighborhood life waking up just outside her window. There were no chefs, no maids, no sterile perfection, only warmth, noise, and the healing embrace of simplicity. Alina stood in front of the small mirror above her childhood dresser and looked at herself. Really looked. Her eyes had shadows beneath them, yes. Her lips didn't smile as easily as they used to. But she was still there. A little broken, a little bruised, but not defeated. "I need to do something," she told her mother one morning. "I can't just sit here waiting to feel whole." Her mother, without hesitation, nodded. "Then go, Beta. Make your own life." That was the beginning of her quiet rebirth. She applied for a job at a nearby school, a modest one, underfunded, but alive with laughter. The principal looked skeptical at first, scanning her name on the resume with raised brows. "You were Mrs. Knight?" "I was Alina before I was anyone else," she replied softly. He offered her the role of school librarian, part-time, humble, barely enough to cover groceries. She accepted it with pride. Her days were now filled with the scent of old books, chalk dust, and the soft whispers of children discovering stories for the first time. She decorated the shelves with handmade signs, organized reading circles, and began tutoring students in the evenings to earn a bit more money. Word spread quickly. A kind woman, patient and brilliant, was helping kids learn to read and dream again. At night, she would walk home, her bag heavy with papers, her steps slow but firm. Her back ached, her hands were ink-stained, but her soul, it had begun to mend. One evening, while picking up groceries, she spotted the headlines on a gossip magazine left behind at the corner shop. "Billionaire dumps, brown bride. Knight's divorce sparks outrage." She stared at the cover for a long moment. There was a blurry photo of Alexander beside a blonde actress laughing at some gala. She bought the magazine, not out of curiosity, but a closure. She sat on her bed that night and read every article, every speculative rumor, every brutal judgment. And when she finished, she tore the pages into tiny pieces, opened the window, and let them fly into the wind. She would not let the world define her by a failed marriage. She had given love, loyalty, and every piece of herself. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Across the city, Alexander's world gleamed under crystal chandeliers and gold-rimmed glasses. He was seen at launches, red carpets, yacht parties. Cameras loved him. Women adored him. Friends toasted his freedom. But something had shifted, and he didn't know when it had started. He'd laugh at a joke and forget what he was laughing at. He'd raise a glass, but the champagne tasted dull. The models beside him, once his favorite distraction, began to blend together, their laughter too shrill, their compliments too practiced. One night, as he walked into his penthouse suite after another party, he noticed a plate of untouched food on the counter. The housekeeper had left it there by request. Soft eggs. Toast, slightly burnt on the edges. A strange pressure built in his chest. He pushed the plate away and poured himself a drink. He didn't miss her. At least that's what he told himself. But sometimes, when the city slept and the silence crept in, he would remember the soft clink of glass bangles, the scent of sandalwood, a voice asking, "Please, I want your time." He'd shake it off, go to bed, wake up hungover, repeat. Alina, meanwhile, bloomed quietly. She learned how to ride the bus, bargain for vegetables, and fall asleep with her heart light instead of heavy. She stitched her soul back together with every book she handed a child, with every paper she graded, with every night she came home tired, but at peace. She had once been left like ashes scattered in the wind. Now, slowly, fiercely, she was rising from them. It was a Monday morning, drenched in brilliance. The skyline sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Knight Enterprises. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation. Alexander Knight, the king of finance, had just closed a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Suited executives surrounded him with admiration, toasting his genius. He stood at the head of the table, tall, sharp, and unbothered, Armani draped perfectly over his frame, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his signature half-smirk in place. And then, in the middle of laughter and applause, it happened. The smirk vanished. His hand tightened around the glass, which slipped and shattered to the floor. His face twisted, not in annoyance, but in agony. A blinding, searing pain exploded in his abdomen, ripping through him like fire. His knees buckled. "Sir!" He dropped to the ground with a thud. Gasps echoed through the room. Phones were whipped out, some for emergency calls, others for shocked photos that would soon leak online. His assistant screamed his name. But Alexander didn't respond. He was too busy drowning in pain and silence. At the hospital, white lights, cold floors, the echo of rushed footsteps. Doctors rushed to his side. IVs were stabbed into his arm. Machines beeped frantically. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, and a cold sweat clung to him. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to hear. "He's got internal bleeding, likely from a ruptured ulcer. We need to get him to surgery, now." "His blood type?" a nurse asked, glancing at the chart. A doctor paled. "Oh, negative." "Damn, it's rare." The surgical team went still. "Start calling the registry," the lead surgeon ordered. "We need 3 bags minimum, and we have 1. He won't make it through without more." Within minutes, Alexander's private doctor contacted his family. His mother, Eleanor Knight, arrived draped in designer grief, her heels clicking against the sterile tile. "Why wasn't I informed sooner?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "What do you mean you don't have enough blood?" "Mom, we've reached out to multiple donors and networks. No match. And he's O negative. It's extremely rare. We're running out of time." "Offer money," she hissed. "Double, triple. Buy whoever has it." Calls went out. Media outlets ran the breaking news. Billionaire Alexander Knight in critical condition. Emergency blood, donors needed. Socialites, politicians, celebrities all reposted it. Tweets went viral. Influencers with filters and fake sympathy shared it, adding heart emojis and prayers. But no one had the right blood. The hours ticked away like a bomb, counting down. Inside the operating prep room, Alexander drifted in and out of consciousness. Pain gnawed at him, but something deeper haunted him. Fear. For the first time in his life, Alexander Knight was afraid, not of death, but of dying alone. Not one of his so-called friends showed up. Not one of his lovers reached out. Not even his sister, vacationing in Milan, bothered to call. His empire, gleaming, polished, ruthless, was suddenly useless. "Where are the damn donors?" the surgeon barked. "We're losing him." The beeping on the monitor spiked. Eleanor gripped her son's cold hand. She, who had once insisted on perfection, on the right look, the right bride, the right life. And now, her perfect son was dying. The family PR agent stepped into the hallway, flustered and pale. "Mom, we have no leads. No one we've called is a match." Tears blurred her mascara. She sank into a chair. The king of the city was crashing, and no one could save him. Until a voice came from the hallway, breathless, sharp with emotion. "I'm O negative. Take my blood." Heads turned. There, standing with her cheeks flushed from running, her eyes fierce with determination, was Alina. She held out her arm without hesitation, her scarf slipping from her shoulders, her skin glowing with sweat and sunlight. "You can take as much as you need. Just save him." Eleanor's mouth parted in stunned silence. Alina, divorced, discarded, humiliated, was here to offer the only thing that could save the man who broke her. The nurse looked at her in disbelief. "You're a match?" "Yes, I know his type. I used to know everything about him." The words sliced through the cold air, calm and sharp. A doctor rushed her inside. As the blood began to flow from her veins to the machines that would carry it into Alexander's body, the hospital seemed to hold its breath. And in the operating room, Alexander's pulse began to stabilize, not because of money, not because of power, but because of love, the very thing he had once thrown away. The rain had just begun to fall in delicate splashes against the windows of the small tutoring center where Alina sat, helping a child sound out a paragraph about bravery. Her hair was tied loosely, her dupatta draped over her shoulder as she leaned in, gently encouraging the boy to pronounce a difficult word. And then, chaos. A television above the receptionist's desk, usually silent, blared into life. An emergency broadcast interrupted the usual programming. Billionaire Alexander Knight in critical condition following sudden collapse, diagnosed with a ruptured ulcer. Requires emergency surgery, but rare blood type O negative. No donor found yet. The name punched her lungs like a fist. Her pen dropped from her fingers. The room blurred. The sounds faded. Her breath caught in her chest. She stood up slowly, heart pounding, lips parting in disbelief. He's dying. There was no time to think, no time to weigh past wounds or gather permission from pride. She whispered something to the receptionist, barely hearing her own voice, and then she ran. Out into the street, into the rain, past honking cars and confused pedestrians. Every step echoed a truth she had buried under months of pain. I never stopped loving him. At the hospital, she burst into the emergency unit, soaked to the bone, eyes wild. "I need to see the doctors," she cried. A nurse tried to stop her, but she gripped the counter with trembling hands. "Please, I'm O negative. I heard on the news. He's dying. Test me now." The staff blinked at her. One nurse hesitated, recognition lighting her face. Are you his ex-wife?" "Yes." Her voice did not falter. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is he needs blood, and I can give it." The nurse hesitated, then rushed to grab a kit. In the testing room, the minutes ticked like thunder. Alina sat on the edge of the cold table, her clothes clinging to her skin, her legs trembling beneath her soaked solwar. The results came quickly. She was a match. A perfect match. "Ma'am," the doctor said gravely, "we have to warn you. You're small-built, and donating this volume under pressure could be dangerous for you. You could faint. You may feel weak for days. In rare cases—" "Stop." Her eyes locked with his. "He gave me pain. Let me give him life." The consent form trembled in her hand as she signed it. Within minutes, she was lying on the donor bed. A needle pierced her vein, and her blood began to flow. Warm, crimson, and laced with history. Nurses moved around her in quiet awe. "She's giving him her blood," one whispered. "Wasn't she the one he divorced? I heard she left with nothing. And now, this." The murmurs faded as Alina closed her eyes. Her body began to chill, her limbs heavier with each passing second. She didn't care. Every drop felt like a prayer. A memory, a goodbye. Her mind drifted to his laughter, cold but charming, to their wedding night, where he hadn't even met her gaze, to the day she left his mansion with nothing but her dignity. And now she was giving him everything. Inside the operating room, the moment her blood reached his failing system, the surgeon's eyes widened, pressures stabilizing. "Heart rate is normalizing. Get ready. We can proceed." The monitors that once screamed now whispered in rhythm. Her blood, rich with betrayal, love, and sacrifice, was saving him. When the transfusion was over, Alina was pale, her breath shallow. A nurse brought her juice and a blanket. "Ma'am," the nurse said softly, "you saved his life. With your own." Alina didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered open briefly. Her voice, barely a whisper, said, "He would have done the same, if he loved me." Then she turned her head and let the tears she'd held in for months flow silently into the pillow. Not for him, for the version of him she had loved so blindly, for the version of herself she had lost along the way. The beeping of machines hummed like a lullaby inside the sterile white walls of the ICU. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. It was late evening, and the world outside was painted in golden dusk, but inside the hospital, time moved slowly, every second stretched by anxiety, recovery, and shadows of what-ifs. Alexander Knight stirred for the first time in almost 36 hours. His eyelids fluttered open. Light pierced through the fog in his mind. His body ached, numb, heavy, fragile in a way he had never known. Machines whirred beside him, tubes ran from his arms. For a man who had ruled boardrooms, tamed markets, and commanded entire empires with a snap of his fingers, this helplessness felt foreign. Humbling, even. He blinked, dazed. A nurse noticed the change and stepped out to call the doctor. Moments later, a middle-aged physician with tired eyes and a steady voice entered the room. "Mr. Knight," he said calmly, checking the monitors, "you gave us quite the scare." Alexander didn't respond. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. The doctor poured him a small cup of water and held it to his lips. "You lost a dangerous amount of blood," the doctor continued. "Emergency surgery was successful, but it was close. You wouldn't be alive if we hadn't found a matching donor in time." Alexander frowned faintly. "Who?" The doctor looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chart, hesitated, and closed it again. "Your ex-wife," he said softly. "Alina Knight." Silence. Complete and deafening silence. Alexander stared, as if the words didn't make sense. The doctor continued, his tone edged with something more human than professional. "She didn't think twice, ran in, demanded we test her, signed the consent without flinching. She gave you her blood. even when we warned her about the risks to her own health. Alexander's lips parted slightly. No words came out. She could have let you die, Mr. Knight, and no one would have blamed her. The doctor placed the chart at the foot of the bed and walked out, leaving Alexander to sit with the truth. The room suddenly felt colder. His hands, once steady and strong, now trembled. He lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers. Why? She had every right to hate him. He had given her a marriage without love, a home without warmth, and a goodbye without dignity. He had spoken to her like she was a curse, an inconvenience forced upon him. He had left her crying in silk sheets while he chased women with pale skin and empty hearts. Yet when death circled him like a vulture, she had been the one to fight it off. He closed his eyes and saw her face, more clearly now than he ever had when they lived together. Not her skin, not her social status, not the color of her culture or the accent of her voice, just her eyes, warm, brave, loyal beyond reason. He remembered them from their wedding day, how they had searched his face for kindness and found none. He remembered how she had tried again and again to make their mansion feel like a home, only to be met with silence or scorn. He remembered the night she had begged him, "I want your time, not your money." And he remembered shouting back, venom laced in every word, "You don't belong in my world." Now here he was, lying broken in a sterile room, alive only because she had refused to let go. Regret slithered into his chest like poison. It wasn't a dramatic rush of guilt, but something slower, deeper. A quiet undoing of everything he had built to protect himself. He turned his head to the side, wincing slightly from the pain in his gut. The IV drip ticked beside him. On the tray, a nurse had left a paper with his vitals. Scribbled on the corner, barely noticeable, was a name. Donor, A. Knight. Her name, still tied to his, still saving him. He clenched the sheets in his fists as if trying to squeeze the ache out of his body. She gave me life, he thought, and I gave her nothing but pain. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Alexander Knight, the ruthless, untouchable billionaire, did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He wept, not from pain, but from the weight of every unspoken word, every cruel silence, every moment he had chosen pride over humanity. And through the veil of those tears, he made a vow to himself. If she could give him her blood to save his life, he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. 3 days after Alexander Knight was discharged from the hospital, a sleek black car rolled into the modest neighborhood where opulence rarely visited. It came to a halt outside a small, 2-story brick house with ivy trailing along its walls, a home that smelled of warm cardamom tea, old books, and resilience. The driver hesitated, but Alexander opened the door himself, stepping out into the soft glow of morning light. Gone was the 3-piece suit, the arrogance stitched into his posture, the designer sunglasses that once shielded him from the world. In their place stood a man who looked human. He wore a simple grey sweater and black pants. His hair was slightly disheveled. A thin white bandage still peeked from beneath his collar. But it wasn't the clothes or the wound that caught attention. It was the humility in his eyes. People paused, curtains twitched, children stopped their cricket games. It wasn't every day the city's most elusive billionaire appeared in their lane. He stepped forward with the pace of a man walking into a storm of his own making. The front door opened slowly. Alina stood in the doorway, dressed in a soft maroon kurta and no makeup, just skin kissed by sunlight and eyes that had seen both dreams and devastation. Their gazes locked. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the wind, not the crowd gathering in murmurs. And then he dropped to his knees. Right there, in the middle of the street, in front of her mother's gate. A billionaire, on the ground. The murmurs around them turned into stunned gasps. Alina's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. Alexander's voice was raspy, yet clear. It rang not with practiced charm, but with raw, naked truth. I judged you by color, not by character. I was blind, Alina. Blind, arrogant, and a coward. You didn't deserve what I gave you. And I didn't deserve the blood you gave me. He lowered his head. You should have let me die. But instead you gave me the most sacred part of yourself. You saved a man who broke you. Tears welled in Alina's eyes, but she did not let them fall. The neighbors watched, whispering to one another, some even recording the moment on their phones. But Alexander didn't care. He wasn't there for a performance. He was there for redemption. She stepped forward slowly. Her shadow fell across his bowed form. Her voice was calm, but steel lay beneath the silk. Love me? She said. You never even saw me. He looked up. You saw my skin, my background, my difference. And you decided I wasn't good enough to touch your world. She took another step forward, close enough now to smell the faint scent of antiseptic on him, to see the weariness in his eyes. You married me and made me invisible. His throat tightened. I know. Alina glanced at the crowd, the same people who had offered her sympathy after her fall, now watched in awe of her rise. But I'm not the woman who walked out of your mansion crying, she said, voice unwavering. I'm the woman who stood again, who taught children while your face was on every magazine. Who bled for you, not because you deserved it, but because I knew how to love. Alexander closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. She took a slow breath, then spoke the words that would mark the beginning of a new story. If you want my love, earn it. His head snapped up. Earn me, Alexander. Earn my respect, my time, my heart. She turned without waiting for his response and walked back into the house, leaving the door half closed. Not shut, not open. Just waiting. Alexander remained kneeling for a long time, even as the crowd slowly dispersed, even as the driver nervously approached him. He didn't move, because for the first time in his life, he had someone to become. And this time, it wasn't about status. It was about soul. The city barely recognized him anymore. Alexander Knight, once the heartbeat of luxury tabloids, had vanished from the front pages. No more champagne-soaked parties. No models hanging from his arms like accessories. No camera flashes trailing him down red carpets. His once sparkling mansion stood quiet now, the gate never opening for the limousines it used to welcome. Inside, a man was breaking, only to rebuild. He had pulled out of business meetings, paused his upcoming ventures, and cancelled appearances. His PR team panicked, but Alexander didn't flinch. The media called it a mental health hiatus. Tabloids speculated about a scandal, but he ignored them all, because none of them knew the truth. He had looked in the mirror one morning, truly looked, and saw the reflection of a stranger. Not the man who wore $20,000 suits, not the king of mergers, but the man who once told a woman, his wife, that she didn't belong in his world. The man who slept soundly while she wept in the next room, the man who didn't realize her worth until her blood ran through his veins. And that man, he had to die. It started small. He cleared his penthouse of alcohol and the ghost of his indulgences. Every bottle, every glass, every memory of careless nights, gone. Then came the therapists. 2 refused to take him seriously at first. Accustomed to high-profile clients looking for quick fixes, they didn't expect sincerity. But when he sat there, week after week, speaking quietly about shame, about how he never learned to say, "I'm sorry," growing up, about the moment he realized Alina was more royal than any of the women he chased, they understood. He cried in those sessions. He unpacked things he didn't even know he carried, like why he always fell for women who praised him but never challenged him, or how he had grown to confuse dominance with dignity, or how afraid he had been of loving someone who didn't look like the women society told him were right for a man of his power. He didn't stop there. He summoned his entire household staff one morning, the same people who had watched Alina set the dining table alone, who had carried her untouched meals back to the kitchen. And he stood before them, not as their employer, but as a man with a wounded heart, and said 2 words most billionaires never utter: "I'm sorry." Some didn't believe him. Others wept silently. He called old flings, not to rekindle anything, but to apologize for the way he had used them to feed a hollow ego. He met his mother for tea, holding her hands in trembling fingers as he whispered how wrong he had been, and how he finally understood the woman she had once called special and too kind for this world. But it was Alina's world he truly longed to enter. He remembered the way her fingers used to trail across pages when she read, how she once quoted Rumi under her breath while watering their plants, how she smiled quietly when books arrived at their doorstep, the only thing she ever bought for herself. So he began reading, not stock indexes or business forecasts, poetry. The same books Alina once kept on her side of the bed, the ones he had never noticed. He scribbled lines into his leather-bound journal. "I closed my mouth and spoke to you in 100 silent ways. Rumi." He began waking at sunrise, drinking herbal tea, meditating, writing letters to no one, letters filled with apologies and longing. And then one day, he went to the library, not dressed in Armani, just a plain navy coat, no entourage, no cameras. He walked into the small public library tucked between a flower shop and a bakery, the one where she worked, the one he had once mocked under his breath as a place for people with time to waste. He sat at the farthest table in the corner, hidden behind the poetry aisle. And then he saw her, Alina, hair tied back in a loose bun, sleeves rolled up, laughing softly as she helped a child find a book on stars. She glowed, not from makeup, not from jewelry, but from something he'd never seen before. Freedom. She didn't notice him, or maybe she did, but pretended not to. And Alexander just watched, heart full and quiet. He returned the next day, and the day after. Never speaking, never approaching, just learning, listening, letting go of who he was. Because some love stories don't start with fireworks. They start with silence, with pain, with a man who realizes that to deserve her heart, he must first earn his own redemption. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Knight was becoming worthy of the love he once threw away. The world didn't recognize this version of Alexander Knight. He no longer made headlines for $1 million watches or scandalous escapades. Instead, the news exploded with something utterly out of character. Billionaire builds shelter for abused women, names it after his ex-wife. At first, people thought it was a PR stunt, another celebrity redemption trick. But when the ribbon-cutting ceremony arrived, there were no paparazzi invited, no red carpets, no champagne towers or fashion icons, just a quiet sunrise, a wide marble pathway, and a name etched in golden script across the stone archway, Alina's Haven. It had taken him 6 months. Every day after his silent library visits, Alexander worked with architects, social workers, trauma psychologists, and non-profit leaders. He spared no expense. He bought land in a peaceful, green suburb, far from the noise of the city, but close enough for access to emergency services. The design was warm and dignified. Sunlight streamed through tall glass windows. The walls were painted in calming earth tones. Each room was private, with soft beds and hand-picked bookshelves. He insisted on details, like lavender-scented sheets, therapy dogs on rotation, fresh flowers in the courtyard, and a children's wing with murals of hope. But more than luxury, he invested in safety. Fingerprint security systems, panic buttons in every room, legal aid offices on site, on-call medical staff, and a team of female guards trained in self-defense. This wasn't charity. It was an apology that lived in brick and mortar. He refused to put his own name anywhere in the building. Instead, at the heart of the lobby stood a bronze sculpture, a woman with a cracked crown held high, standing barefoot on a battlefield, holding a book in one hand and a flame in the other. Beneath it, the inscription read, "To the woman who taught me the meaning of real beauty, and to all those whose power lies not in the world's approval, but in the light of their survival." The media spun, social platforms buzzed, celebrities offered donations, women from all walks of life sent letters, but Alexander remained silent. He didn't give interviews, he didn't pose with officials, he visited once a week, quietly, just to make sure the women had everything they needed. He spoke to them, not like a man on a pedestal, but like a student in awe of warriors. Alina found out through a whisper. She hadn't spoken to him since the day he knelt at her gate. Life had moved forward, and yet fragments of the past still lived inside her. So when a colleague at the library showed her the headline, she blinked, heart skipping. "He named it after you?" She didn't respond. But that night, she looked up photos online, photos of the building, of the sculpture, of the inscription, her name, her truth, immortalized. And suddenly, all the nights she had cried alone in that cold mansion came rushing back. She had never asked for recognition, never demanded repayment. But now, the world saw what he had once refused to see. That she was never weak, never less. Still, her heart hesitated. Was it real? Or was this the greatest performance of all? She visited Alina's Haven quietly, without announcing herself. She blended in with a group of donors and watched from a distance. She saw the way he spoke to a woman with a bruised eye, not with pity, but with reverence. She watched him kneel to help a little girl fix her toy, then hand her a copy of The Little Prince with a tender smile. He didn't know she was there. He wasn't performing. And for the first time in months, Alina's walls began to shake. That night, she stood at the edge of her bed, holding the wedding photo she had taken with her when she left the mansion. The one where he didn't even look at her. And she whispered, as if to herself, "Maybe there's a man beneath the monster after all." But still, she locked the photo away. Not in anger, in caution. Because redemption wasn't built in one gesture, even if it cost millions. Redemption had to survive time, prove its roots, and Alina, once broken, was no longer a woman who rushed toward fire. Now she let the flame come to her. Alina never expected to cry in the hallway of a shelter that bore her name. She had walked its corridors countless times now, donating books, bringing hot meals, and volunteering in the reading corner. Each time, she felt the cautious whispers around her. That's her. That's the one he built all this for. But she never asked questions, never sought confirmation of the man's heart behind the marble walls. Until one cold morning, a woman in a loose hoodie and cracked glasses tugged at her sleeve near the therapy room. "Are you Alina?" the woman asked. Alina smiled softly. "Yes. I just wanted to say, thank you. Because of you, he built this. And because of this, I'm still alive." Alina blinked, heart catching. The woman's voice was raspy, her lip split from a recent fight she'd barely escaped. "I tried to end it," she whispered, "after my husband threw me out. I had no one. No money. I slept in a park for 2 nights. And then I came here." Her eyes shone with tears. "I told him my story," she said. "I thought he would look at me with pity, or like I was trash. But he cried. He actually cried. I hadn't seen a man cry since my father died." Alina felt a sudden warmth bloom in her chest, a painful, confusing warmth. The woman touched her hand. "I don't know what happened between you two, but that man worships your ghost." It wasn't the words alone. It was the way the woman said them, without drama, without agenda, just raw, unfiltered truth. And for the first time since their last painful encounter, Alina began to wonder. Could people really change? Could he? That night, she sat by her window, diary open, pages blank. A million thoughts circled her mind. She thought of the man who once mocked her brown skin, her simple clothes, her presence. The man who never came home before dawn. The man who had whispered, "You don't belong in my world." But now, there was a different man in that same body. A man who stood in silence beside victims, who read poetry instead of closing deals, who had let go of status and built sanctuary in its place. She didn't love him, not yet, but she no longer hated him either, and that meant something. So she agreed to meet him. No warning, no dressing up, just a bench in the garden behind the shelter. The wind was crisp, blowing softly through the late autumn leaves. He was already there, dressed plainly. No suit, no cologne, just a man, knees slightly shaking, breath short with nerves. When their eyes met, time slowed. Alina sat down beside him. For a few moments they didn't speak. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. Then he broke it, carefully. "You're even more beautiful now." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you brought me here to say?" He shook his head. "Number, I came to listen. I've talked too much in my life, especially when I should have been listening to you." And he meant it. So she told him things she had never spoken out loud. Not to him, not to anyone. How she used to wait by the door, just to hear his car pull into the driveway. How she would rehearse conversations in her head, dreaming of a night where they shared one simple dinner together. How she had once tried to wear a white dress, thinking it might make him look at her differently. And how every night she prayed not for his love, but for her own heart to stop hoping. His eyes shimmered with pain. He didn't interrupt, didn't justify, didn't flinch. When she finished, he spoke with a voice low and trembling. I still remember how you looked the first day I saw you. That gold dress, the jasmine in your hair, the way you smiled, even when I didn't return it. He turned toward her now, fully. I told myself you weren't my type, that you were forced on me. But the truth is, I was afraid of how deeply you saw me, and of how ugly I looked in your reflection. Alina's throat tightened. You weren't ugly, she whispered. You were just broken. He nodded slowly. Then maybe now, I'm learning how to rebuild. They didn't kiss, they didn't even touch, but something passed between them. Not romance, not forgiveness, just the soft, sacred birth of mutual understanding. A kind of love that wasn't fiery or instant, but slow, careful, earned, the kind of love built on ashes, and as they sat under the fading light of day, side by side on that quiet garden bench, the air between them finally felt like home. The wound was still there. But now, so was the cure. The evening air was cool, laced with the scent of jasmine and the whisper of memories. Alina had just returned from the shelter, her heart heavier than usual. A new girl had arrived that day, only 16, carrying a bruised arm and eyes older than time. The pain in her silence had shaken Alina to her core. She brewed some tea and settled on the worn balcony of her mother's small home, wrapped in her favorite shawl. And there, waiting on the little wooden table beside her teacup, was a small envelope, creamy ivory, unmarked, except for her name in pen, written in a hand she hadn't seen in years. Alexander's. Her breath caught. Beneath the envelope, a single rose. Not just any rose, a rare, soft peach blossom, the exact kind her father had planted when she was 8, in the small, sun-drenched corner of their childhood garden. A flower he used to say matched the glow of her cheeks when she laughed. He had always promised, one day, when the right man falls in love with you, he'll know this rose means more than diamonds. She hadn't seen that flower in over a decade. Until now, her fingers trembled as she opened the letter. Alina, I used to think power meant control, that love was possession, that beauty was something you could measure in magazine covers or party invitations. But the day you left, and the day you gave me your blood without hesitation, something shattered in me, something poisonous. And I've been rebuilding ever since, not for you to return, but to become someone worthy of ever standing in your light. I know what I destroyed. I know what I threw away. But this time, I don't want your hand as proof I've changed. I don't want your name beside mine to feel redeemed. I want your heart, not out of guilt or pity or forgiveness. I want it because it's the only home I've ever felt safe in. And if it takes 100 letters, 1,000 sleepless nights, or a lifetime, I'll wait, even if it takes forever. Yours, only now and always, Alexander. Alina didn't realize she was crying until the ink on the letter blurred beneath a falling tear. She pressed the paper to her chest. The silence of the evening wrapped around her like a cocoon. She thought of everything they had endured. The betrayal, the indifference, the nights she had slept alone with hope, clinging like thorns inside her chest. She thought of the girl at the shelter who said, "That man worships your ghost." And suddenly, she wasn't thinking about the pain anymore. She was remembering the night she saw him help a broken woman fix her shoes, the way he read The Little Prince to a child with such reverence, the name etched across an entire sanctuary. Not his, but hers. She whispered into the night, almost afraid of the sound of her own confession. I never stopped loving you. But she wasn't ready to run back. Not yet. So instead, she walked to the small corner of her backyard garden, the one that still held her father's soil, dry and cracked. The bush that hadn't bloomed in years. She knelt beside it, pressing her fingers into the roots. And then, tenderly, she planted the peach rose Alexander had given her, watered it with her tears. Let it be the symbol of something still growing, something patient, unfolding, real. That night, as she lay in bed, she placed Alexander's letter inside the pages of her diary, pressed close to the entry she wrote the day he walked away. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like the abandoned wife. She felt like the woman a king now knelt before, asking not for forgiveness, but for love, the kind that only blooms when everything else has been stripped away. It was late afternoon when the soft purr of an engine echoed outside Alina's haven. The shelter was quiet, the day winding down. A few women sat under the pergola sipping tea. Children played in the courtyard, and the golden sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden paths. Alexander stood inside the art room, gently rolling up his sleeves as he helped paint a mural with the younger girls. He didn't notice the hush that suddenly spread through the building, but the staff did, and the women. And then, a voice. Software. Familiar. Nice brushwork, Mr. Knight. Alexander turned so fast the brush slipped from his fingers. There she stood, Alina, wrapped in a soft blue shawl, eyes bright with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. And something else. Hope. For a moment, no one moved. Even the children paused mid-play, sensing something sacred in the air. He didn't speak. Couldn't. He took one step forward, then stopped, afraid to break the spell. Alina stepped toward him. Her voice, when she spoke, trembled, but it was steady enough to pierce every wall he'd once built. You've changed, Alexander swallowed hard, because you showed me what love really is. A silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid memories, forgiveness, and years of aching. Then she closed the distance. No more walls, no more doubts. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest, the same chest she'd once cried into in loneliness, and now rested in safety. His arms came around her, strong, sure, reverent, and finally, they kissed. Not the kind of kiss born from lust or possession, but the kind that felt like a vow. Slow, tender, redemptive. A kiss that said, we survived. We're still here. A kiss that whispered, welcome home. The women watching nearby smiled, a few with tears in their eyes. One whispered to another, he built this place for her. No, the other replied gently. He became this place for her. Later that evening, as stars dusted the night sky, Alina walked hand in hand with Alexander through the gardens of the shelter. They stopped under the peach blossom tree he had planted from her childhood rose. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple chain. No diamond, no glitter. Just a single gold pendant shaped like a book, engraved with the words, "She was always the story worth reading." Alina traced the engraving with her fingers, eyes welling. "You never needed to buy my love," she whispered. He smiled, his voice soft. "I know. I just had to earn it." And in the days that followed, Alina's haven bloomed in more ways than one. The couple who had once been a scandal became a symbol of second chances, of the power of a woman's grace, of a man's ability to unlearn pride and embrace humility. Together, they held workshops for young girls. They traveled the world, advocating for women's shelters. They shared their story, not with shame, but with courage. And on the first anniversary of the shelter's opening, Alexander stood before a crowd of hundreds, holding Alina's hand. "This isn't just a place we built," he said. "It's a love letter to every woman who's ever been underestimated, silenced, or unseen, and to the one woman who taught me how to see." Alina squeezed his hand and whispered, "Forever." This time, he didn't respond with words. He responded with a kiss. A new chapter began that day, not just for them, but for every woman who walked through the doors of Alina's haven. A story that started in betrayal, now ended in belonging. Not a fairy tale, but something deeper. A love reborn.